Hey everyone, welcome to episode 41 of the Miami Tech Pod. I'm Cesar. I'm joined by Brian. Will and Maria are out this week, but we have Daniel Kleinman from Seaworthy Collective with us. Daniel, welcome to the Miami Tech Pod, man.
Thanks so much, guys. Great to be here. I'm a huge fan and really excited to share all of the progress we've been making with our cohort with all you guys.
Cool. The huge fan thing just throws me off. I mean, like people come up to like all of us and they're like, "Hey, there's this one thing you said on the pod." And I was like, "Whoa, I'm sorry. I'm Cesar. Nice to meet you." Um, but it's really cool that you've listened to a bunch of episodes, man. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I like the fact that people come up to me and they're like, "I heard this on Caesar's podcast, blah blah blah," and then don't know that I'm on this podcast. So
that happens. We were at the Atomic event last night. Atomic and Refresh Miami did a really great open house at the Atomic headquarters yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that happened yesterday. Someone told that to Maria. I'm not going to mention their names because I'm still trying to figure out if it was serious or not. And I'm an investor in the company, so we're going to skip through that. But what a good event. Brian, what do you think of that?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, it was one of the first in-person Refresh official events that we've had in a long time, and it's like we're starting to get that sort of energy and motion going again, now that people are starting to feel more comfortable and there's more safety around that and stuff, but it was good to be back and be around people and stuff like that, and I think Matt Hagman and I were talking about this, how it's good to have the companies behaving like good citizens or good neighbors, when they come to town, because one of the big fears amongst a lot of locals is that people will come here and stomp all over everything and act like they know better than everyone. Whereas the Atomic folks were very gracious and very interested in being friends with the community. Right. And so they opened their doors and they gave everyone open bar and food and stuff like that,
Yeah, there was a particular moment last night when Chester from Atomic was kind of introducing the work they do and their portfolio and all of that. That he just threw out this amazing tidbit. He said, "Look, we took 3 floors in this building, so we have to fill it with companies. So yeah, if you know anyone that wants to build something, please send them our way." And that was just really amazing to hear that those guys are just going all in on Miami in that way.
Yeah. I was going to say, I actually have had a chance to sit down with Healy. He was actually at our first Seaworthy event back in May. And they're definitely great guys. I didn't get to go last night. I was bummed about that, but I have gotten to see their office, and someone's got to use it because it's gorgeous.
Exactly. Daniel, talk to us a little bit about your journey into entrepreneurship, Seaworthy Collective, how you got here. We'll kind of start there and talk a little bit more, segue into the blue tech movement here in Miami.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I am a native South Floridian. I am born and raised Cooper City, 954. But I actually left South Florida, going to North Florida in Gainesville for my bachelor's in mechanical engineering at University of Florida, and then really stayed in the Northeast for a bit, working in Cape Cod for a summer at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and Boston shortly after that at a company called Bluefin Robotics. And so my background is actually in marine robotics. I've been a pilot and test engineer. I've done hydrodynamic simulations and actual design of underwater vehicles from the ground up. And really all of this is guided by this passion that I have for doing technology and innovation for ocean science and exploration. And of course, I got that from growing up down here, snorkeling, diving, you name it, on the water. And so knowing that this was an area that, should I actually end up in this field, the one guarantee I wanted to have was a beach nearby. Got that. Problem was, in Boston, the beaches aren't very nice, and it got way too cold to go to the beach most of the time. But all that being said, really this passion I had going into the field, you kind of initially go in, especially fresh out of college, very rose-colored glasses, if you will, of anything's possible, and then quickly you get to see what the reality is. And so getting to intern at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. If you're not familiar with them, they're one of the leading oceanographic research institutions in the US, if not the world. They're the ones who found the Titanic and really are just well known for being, the kind of SpaceX of the oceans before Ray Dalio started OceanX. Terrible branding. But all that being said, really that was like my one validation of my passion to actually say, like, I got to work on one underwater vehicle that actually was like an autonomous vehicle that profiled different layers in the ocean and, analyzed their RNA in situ. The biology is not my thing. I did the hydrodynamics and the fun conceptual design stuff. But all that being said, it was just this, really about, and kind of like a little foundational piece for Seaworthy was about the fact that I was in a community of people that were doing the work for the right reasons and really passionate about it. And so then getting into private sector after I graduated, I worked for Bluefin Robotics, which was a MIT spin out in Boston. And 6 months into working there, they got bought out by a defense contractor called General Dynamics. And really for me, that was kind of one of the first moments that I realized things weren't really as promising as I'd hoped getting into the private sector. And when I say that, it's really just about, again, getting back to those limited opportunities to really do what I was passionate about. And so once they got bought out, I knew that was, I love to say I had the choices of dealing with winter and selling out and work for a defense company and knowing I couldn't do both. So I moved to San Diego, where I actually spent the last 3 years as a contractor for the Navy, doing R&D for them. And really Bluefin was a really validating experience, regardless of the defense piece, where I actually got to pilot and test underwater vehicles at sea. Literally, I was a 23-year-old fresh out of college, responsible for multi-million-dollar underwater robots, and literally being the youngest employee at the company and telling former Navy chiefs what to do on deck. So it was an awesome challenge. But really, when I got back to San Diego, that was, first off, kind of a transitional time for me, but really just gave me the foundation to go into what I really wanted to do. And one of the last pieces of kind of my inspiration for my entrepreneurial journey was learning how folks from UC San Diego out in the Scripps Institution of Oceanography out there were actually in and out of my lab on the Navy base that I worked on, and just really showing how deeply intertwined defense and also fossil fuel interests are really in the ocean science and innovation space. And so when we talk about blue tech, which is ocean technology, first off, it's very deeply intertwined with climate technology, in that the oceans are the biggest carbon sink on the planet, and if we have a chance of reversing climate change, we have to use the majority of the planet. But the real thing that stuck with me was just that there was no real accessible opportunity to do that work. And so really, from all of these confluence of factors mixed with actually having a background also in design and systems thinking, I was able to take a step back and really see just how, as a whole, the field was very much geared toward serving these, limited interests as a result of also public funding shortages, and really just an overall, misalignment in priorities of what people are looking to get into the field for versus what the actual opportunities are.
So Daniel, this please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but so you worked at a company called Bluefin Dynamics or Bluefin
Robotics.
Bluefin Robotics.
They're bought by General Dynamics.
Oh, okay. And so, am I wrong in assuming that you were building robotic dolphins that were later lasers were added to when General Dynamics bought them?
100%.
Well,
we know the answer to that.
It has to be true, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, so get this. So the Navy, so I can say this. So the Navy in San Diego, they actually have trained attack dolphins and mine hunting dolphins. Those exist. You can look them up. I literally ate lunch every day watching them jump around their pens. And we were actually building the robot to replace the dolphins because they're getting phased out because now people care about them being ethically treated. And so, so we were building underwater mine hunting robots. So no lasers, unfortunately. Kind of fortunately, I don't know if I could sleep at night, but
wait, so are these, did they find evil dolphins to train them into attack mode, or were these nice dolphins that were trained into brainwashed towards?
I think they were SeaWorld rejects. They were the people that were like, this tacky tourist. No, it's I mean, I don't know the whole training program. That was that blew my mind. But what I will, no, it blew my. But what I was gonna say, the fun fact I did know about the dolphins though was there was like notorious like mean streak, or like, there were some that actually had a reputation that people would talk about around the base, where like it would escape the pen, and then there was a male dolphin that escaped the pen and came back with like 3 female dolphins. So I don't know, they got a lot of testosterone, to say the least.
I mean, don't hate the dolphin player, right? Like,
well, doing better than the football team these days.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Can the Navy come and train the Miami Dolphins? Like, is that okay?
But that's cool. I remember hearing stories years ago about dolphins being trained to like seek out mines and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think like you and I actually met almost 2 years ago at this point, right?
Yeah.
Before you enrolled at UM to get your master's. So for context, guys, listeners, so Daniel reached out to me because I run the Entrepreneurship Center for the University of Miami, and Daniel is finishing up his master's at UM. And so we had a lot of conversations about sort of, poking holes in the business model and stuff like that of Seaworthy early on. And I'm very proud of how far you've come along from those early conversations to now. And I can only take 100% credit. No, I'm just kidding. I take no credit for that, but it does intrigue me about the idea of finding viable business models that work with blue tech, and blue tech innovation and all this stuff, because I'm sure there's a ton of really great researchers and scientists and things like that who have ideas that they would love to pursue or get funding for, but until there's viable business models, it doesn't make sense, right? And that's where you come in.
Well,
yeah,
why
don't you break that down, Daniel? Why don't you kind of go through how Seaworthy set up, how companies can partner with Seaworthy and all of that for our listeners?
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to take a step back. So before we get to business model, let's talk about culture, right? So Brian, as you mentioned, I left San Diego, came back to South Florida to both grab my master's here at University of Miami and also launched Seaworthy, which we launched September of last year, so just over a year now. And really for me, when I got back to Miami, one of the key things that really, really just was stark to me about being now in the community of people that I identified with in ocean science and oceanographic research was the fact that I was very much, sticking out, if you will, as one of the few people who actually wanted to do something entrepreneurial. It's culturally in the sciences, people do research for the sake of research, right, and go on to further academia or go off to public sector and work for NOAA. I even took a leadership class at RASMUS, the Rosenstiel School, and all of the examples of leaders we should be aspiring to work for, we're working in those two sides. No one's thinking outside this box of public sector academia. And so I think that's one of the first problems, and really the bigger kind of shift that we're looking to make is saying before you can even get to business models, it's really a cultural problem to say like, okay, if on the private sector side, no one's, as I mentioned, everyone's really focused on fossil fuels and defense because those are the big industries. And on the public sector side, or academia and public sector, they have no commercial focus or entrepreneurial focus, then no one's even going to ever get to building a business model in the first place because there's never going to be any sort of convergence. So systemic problems was actually the biggest problem. But getting to your point about the actual business models, I think some of the interesting trends that we're seeing, first and foremost, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, investing, impact investing, it's one of the biggest growing trends in investment, and rightfully so, as climate change has gotten more and more stark. But really, when I look at some of the biggest trends in the ocean space, and 4 of the members of our cohort are in this, it's carbon dioxide removal. That's one of the biggest things. We're not talking about mitigation. We're talking about removal. And so I'll get to kind of some of the thesis on that. But really, when we talk about the emerging business models, I think in my mind, and what Seaworthy's done is we actually are a hybrid. We have a nonprofit arm and a for-profit arm. And I think that's something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of moving forward as people really focus on building double and triple bottom line businesses. And by that, I mean hitting on social impact, environmental impact, and economic impact, or 2 out of those 3, right? And so, to me, the business models that we're seeing, for our cohort, We have one actually very Miami appropriate. One company who's actually leveraging DAOs and using that to create the hybrid model for them to incentivize impact in seaweed. But even beyond that, we're seeing just, I think, a bigger shift in even the investment landscape as well, where I know investors who also have a donor advised fund on the side as well. So they're doing both philanthropy and investment. So it's really interesting how the models are evolving on both sides as far as investors and philanthropists go, as well as the actual companies themselves.
That's interesting, especially on, you mentioned impact investing. We saw earlier this year that Chris Saka launched Lower Carbon Capital. It was an $800 million fund to essentially go in on these types of companies. Have you seen, aside from Saka, investors start allocating pieces of the portfolio or actual funds that are being established to really accelerate the growth of these types of ventures?
Yeah, so I mean, lower carbon capital is definitely up there on my list. There's a couple of great resources out there that kind of compile some of the blue tech investors. I will say CDR, as it's known for short carbon dioxide removal, is still a very new field. And spoiler, one of our co-created startups is the first one doing CDR work in South Florida. But
which
really,
is
it's called Sea Green Regeneration.
And what do they do? What's the actual mechanics of that business?
Yeah, so basically they're growing seaweed, and the interesting piece is, CDR is what's getting the most attention right now in the space, but what's equally important here locally is the fact that we also have a nutrient sequestration problem. The red tide and the fish kills that we've been getting in Biscayne Bay are directly linked to fertilizer runoff and wastewater runoff. And basically we have this oversaturation of nutrients in the water, and we need to remove that. And nature's natural tool to remove that is seaweed. So basically we're saying not only can we solve that problem, but also sequester carbon dioxide, getting kind of a buy one, get one, if you will, on major environmental problems, and also incentives.
So Daniel, walk me through this, because this is something that you and I have been talking about for 2 years. And I'm curious about this space and sort of the business mechanism here. And so this company that's harvesting seaweed, right? And it's so the financial sort of driver for this is, are they selling this seaweed for use, some specific use, or are they selling carbon credits that they can prove that they've earned through, how does this work?
Yeah,
as our good friend and friend of the podcast, Alex Roy, would say, what's the business and how do they make money?
Yes. So basically carbon credits is definitely a big business, but that is still an emerging market for sure. But there is a lot to be done in the product side. Bioplastics, we actually have a company in our cohort that also does the processing of seaweed. But really, bioplastics, pharmaceuticals, even actually livestock feed is a major opportunity. If you put seaweed in livestock feed, it can cut their methane emissions by up to 80%, 80. So it's a amazing tool for combating climate change and already making better products. At the same time, again, I think what most investors are seeing is really the big play is the carbon credits. There's actually one of the, I would say, best models right now out there. There's a company in Maine called Running Tide, and they're a seaweed growing company as well. They're growing kelp, and they sink it to the seafloor and are able to already get carbon credits for that. And they raised, I think, $11 or $19 million investment.
So they raise the seaweed, it sucks in carbon dioxide from the water or from the air above the surface, right? And then they just cut it and it drops to the bottom and disintegrates.
So basically it's basically almost like creating
compost.
It's doing kind of the natural, basically natural composting in a lot of ways. Like doing the natural cycle where, because of the water pressure, the biology, I'm not an expert on, but I think it's a mix of either the water pressure or they might actually weigh it down. I think they might anchor it, but bottom line, they keep it down there, and over time nature sequesters it, and they can actually say that we have real demonstrated carbon removal.
Cool. Yeah, because proving that you're actually sequestering the carbon and stuff like that is a big issue, right? Because a lot of times there were stories of people like reselling their carbon credits against one forest like a dozen times because there was no proof that this had already been accredited and stuff like that.
Yes, if only we were also co-creating a startup to actually create modular sensor packages to put on boats that can help actually quantify ESG metrics. That one we actually haven't formally announced. We'll be announcing that next week, but we can put it out there. Little teaser, and that's something that I'm all for saying. How do we make it tangible? And that's really one of the biggest questions people love to say is how do you measure impact? And to me, when I first got that question, I know it definitely bothered me for quite a few days. So that's a really great point, Brian, on the fact that we need to be able to measure these to begin to even then actually say we're really combating climate change.
So what are the other companies that Seaworthy's partnered with or has helped incubate, just for our listeners? So just walk us through the portfolio here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, would you like me to give kind of the rundown on us first, and then let you know what we're doing for them?
Yeah, go for it, for sure.
Okay, awesome. So first off, we are a blue tech startup community and venture studio empowering current and aspiring entrepreneurs in regenerative ocean and climate impact. And again, when I say blue tech, that's ocean tech, but really, again, so many of these things go through ocean. So really what we're able to do is we have a startup community and a venture studio. And so the idea is that, again, the startup community is our nonprofit side, and that's working to make ocean innovation accessible, inclusive, and interdisciplinary, and then building and educating that community so that then we can activate them through our for-profit arm, which is our venture studio, to both co-create startups or help existing startups catalyze traction and collaboration. So overall, we can build a pipeline of startups in blue tech that really builds out the ecosystem here in South Florida and well beyond. And so really for this first cohort, what we've been able to accomplish is bringing together startups across 6 different verticals that we call our opportunities for sea change that individually have great potential for impact, but it really, when we look at it as a collective system, it really magnifies that potential. And that's really one of the key approaches that we've taken that we've gotten some amazing feedback to know that is really unique. So it's about, instead of, incubators and accelerators are a lot of times very vertical specific or stage specific, it's actually about the interplay between the different verticals and the fact that not everyone's at the same stage. That's actually beneficial because that ends up helping to create these systems and helping, the one unique thing about the ocean spaces and the climate spaces, people understand it's not fully capitalistic. It's collaborative, and the fact is rising tides lift all ships. So the whole point of what we're doing is basically bringing together folks from regenerative ocean food sources and aquaculture combined with carbon dioxide removal, anything in technology and innovation, coastal resilience, treating seawater as a resource, whether it be ocean energy or desalination, or even doing plastic pollution detection and removal. And so all that being said, we have 10 different startups in our first cohort, which 2 of which we've co-created and 8 that are existing startups that we call crowdsourced startups. And they're spanning 4 different verticals, from 4 that are in carbon dioxide removal, which includes sea green regeneration that we mentioned earlier, one of our co-created startups that's doing seaweed initially and eventually maybe scaling to mangroves as well. We have another one called Unboxed that I also mentioned. That's the co-created startup doing actual ESG metrics and measurement. And then for our existing startups, we have a couple in aquaculture from Panacea who's doing sea cucumber aquaculture, which what's fascinating about that is sea cucumbers are actually the 3rd most valuable seafood on the planet. I did not know that, but they at the same time are this amazing opportunity to be a cash crop for reef regeneration, where you raise sea cucumbers, they basically crap out the ingredients to help build reefs, and then you can sell them off, for something just a little cheaper than tuna. And then IntelliAqua is doing actually AI for aquaculture as well. And then a couple other seaweed companies that we have. Key Farms is a Jamaican seaweed farm, and they also are the ones who have an amazing structure leveraging blockchain to incentivize impact. And then Thalasso is also in the seaweed space doing both collecting sargassum, which is the invasive species that we have washing up on our shores, and then also creating the biorefinery network to process those. And then a local startup, Addition Company, they're doing 3D printing of seawalls. And so we've been working with them, and we're going to be launching a crowdfunding campaign with them next week. And then Supremo is actually a Brazilian AI for natural disaster startup, and we actually helped them get a pilot with Paddle. And so they're actually getting their first Miami pilot shortly. And then we have 2 more ocean-based climate solutions, which is doing carbon dioxide removal work with actually helping to create phytoplankton blooms, which phytoplankton are actually the main sequesterer of carbon in the ocean. And then the last one is Tiktaalik Labs, which is doing a digital twin of the ocean. So altogether, there's really this model that we've focused on of saying, how do we build synergies between them, where, it's not just about helping these startups succeed individually and perpetuate silos, but actually how we can help, again, build these systems of solutions to really build up our local ecosystem and economy.
How many of the companies that are in this community have started working together? I mean, I caught some of that in the rundown here, but is that the goal ultimately, to create a lot of partnership opportunities within these companies, or across these companies?
Yeah, so it's really the two goals are traction and collaboration, right? And so basically what that means is, first off, we sit down with them. Actually, we've been sitting down with them every week, going over their objectives and KPIs, and knocking out a significant number of KPIs with each one. And then the collaboration component is really about creating meaningful partnerships for systems building. So for example, Thalasso does processing of seaweed, and we have 2 different seaweed companies, right? That's a natural thing. But then this is where things get interesting. So then you pair that with Panacea, who's doing, again, raising sea cucumbers, right? And sea cucumbers actually eat seaweed. So altogether, if you bring those 3 startups together, you actually have a system that can help regenerate coastal environments, where basically you're raising sea cucumbers, which help create reefs. You're planting seaweed, which can help reverse climate change and feed the sea cucumbers. And then you have a business to actually process that seaweed and turn it into value chain items, or the actual products that get sold. And so altogether, it's about actually showing that you can create ROI and net positive impact. And that's just one example. But it's fascinating to me that I think the best part is some of these startups, we didn't even realize there were synergies, especially some of the AI startups that Supremo has been probably the best example of, where not only are they working with Paddle, but they're also working with the Edition company who's doing the 3D printing of seawalls, where they're going to put sensors on their seawalls. And what if they could not only help protect against storm surge and natural disasters, but create data that can actually help us get ahead of that. So these are the kind of things that we're seeing coming out of the cohort. And I would say pretty much every startup has gotten at least one collaborator or more, whether it's with each other or from our network.
That's pretty, I mean, you're almost like vertically integrating all these things. If you were to like roll them into one company, and it's really interesting to think about, like, what are the possibilities with like seaweed harvesting? Because like you and I talked about sort of the Green Wave org. So Green Wave, for those who don't know, is a nonprofit out of, I think, Long Island or something like that, that's pushing for aquaculture harvesting and through mollusks and seaweed variants and stuff like that. And I think they started with the aim of supplying restaurants and but I think they've shifted to more industrial uses because of the shelf life, and just people don't eat as much seaweed as they need them to eat in order to make it commercially viable. But it's really interesting to think about also, like, what are the other types of like products that we use on a day-to-day basis that could be substituted with seaweed based pulp, right? Or raw material, right? Like, could our Amazon delivery boxes be made out of seaweed at some point,
Well, and I think, to me, the thing is, it's, and this is one of the other kind of key things that we're working toward shifting the paradigm on, which is, not only are we trying to focus on creating seaweed products, but the idea is really to say, like, what if we could be, instead of just going for net zero, right, net negative, or net negative on carbon emission, or net positive for the planet, whatever you want to call it. But the point is really just about pushing people for going beyond sustainability and talking about regeneration. That's one of the key theses for Seaworthy, is to say, sustainability was great 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Sustainability for the oceans is kind of an inherently flawed concept when 90% of fish stocks are exploited, overexploited, or depleted. If you can tell me you can sustainably fish from 10% of anything, I'd say you're great at marketing, right? The reality is we're past the point of sustainability, and we need to start thinking about, okay, how do we aspire for doing better than just net zero? Because if we fall short, then we're worse than we were before.
True. I mean, there's like the very much a mic drop moment for you on the pod, but man, it's really we're just in awe of how you're laying this out, because it's like it's a real problem, and it's neat that you have entrepreneurs that are trying to solve it. to kind of come back to the funding aspect of it, I'm really curious, like, how much of the problems that these companies are trying to solve are actually resource constraint problems versus like resource problems versus, like technological advance problems, right? Like where, throwing money at this stage of the advancement of the technology doesn't actually get you incremental, like benefit, just research may, or actually is it a money problem, right? Like I'd love to get your take on that dynamic.
Yeah, I actually love to say the problem with the ocean space isn't an innovation problem. It's an implementation problem. Brian, to the point we hit on earlier, right? There's all these cultural barriers to people not even getting to the point of commercializing technology and research. But really, to me, it's the fact that we've never really applied the technology and had the support from public funding to actually develop technology for the right reasons, right? It's all been primarily funneled to defense and fossil fuels. So the technology already exists. And the crazy thing is it's really simple because for years we've been trying to outdesign nature and we're losing badly. And so what's happening is, especially with this regenerative movement, is that people are realizing that nature-based solutions are really the core of this. And, a lot of our startups are doing, we have some that are doing real tech, addition companies, literally 3D printing seawalls. That's never been done before. The lassos using autonomous boats for cleaning sargassum out of the water. But at the same time, for a lot of the big problems in climate change and blue tech related, it is really, in my mind, about, just these barriers to implementation and the fact that when you look at the existing system and a lot of the pathways that don't exist, the fact is we just need accessible opportunities to real resources. And I say disruptive is a very cliche word, but when I think about the disruptive piece of what we've done is really the fact that this is the first real accessible opportunity for people to get into blue tech. It is one of the most exclusionary fields, and I had to scratch and claw my way to get into it. My internship.
Why is that? Why is it exclusionary?
Well, and I think it gets back to these cultural things, right? So when people think about blue tech, right, first thing most people think is you need a marine science degree or PhD to be in this space, right? Ocean engineering programs are very, very few. Mechanical engineering encompasses a lot of different things. Ocean engineering, for the most part, is included. But culturally, again, most people get dissuaded by the fact that, well, I don't have a marine science degree, so how could I do this kind of work, right? And I think it's really, and also I think the pandemic's even been a great way of highlighting how people get very, throw their hands up at the size of the problem, right? They say it's too big of a problem. I don't have a control or the ability to contribute to it, right? They write themselves off. And the whole point is the blue tech field has really suffered because of that, because we've had such a talent desert, especially on the technical front. And really the only major blue tech hubs, which I worked in both Boston and San Diego. Seattle's pretty good too. And actually the company I worked for in San Diego is based in Seattle. But the reason why they are hubs is because they're defense oriented and they've been able to capitalize on that. Good.
And let's be real, right? There's not an army of people who are naturally chasing SaaS multiples to build really large $100 billion companies that tier one VC firms are going to be funding because it's a rinse repeat way of, growing these companies. You don't have the same dynamic from a business model of these insane 300%, month over month early stage company growth, right? It's much more of a long tail problem that some of these companies are solving.
Well, this is where things get really fun. So no one really knows the ROI yet in blue tech and climate tech. And that's getting back to the fact that the biggest exits have primarily happened in the defense field, where all of those exits are kept under wraps because it's defense. So that's one of the big problems it's both a hidden gem, but also suffered as a result of that. And then when we think about ESG, obviously this is still emerging. So it hasn't been fully proven yet. But people are continuing to say, climate tech is where, the next unicorns are going to be coming out of, right? Or the future unicorns, or even $1 trillion companies, right? Because it's such a massive problem that needs to be solved. And as soon as carbon is really, a marketable, good, if you will, there's going to be tangible value to fight over.
It brings up an interesting thread, what you guys are talking about, because, a lot of times like capitalism needs a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow to chase, right? And I think there's every so often there's like an incremental, you know, discovery of a new pot of gold, right? Like there was recently some scientists who realized that they could pull lithium out of seawater, right? And like there's more lithium in seawater than there is in all the mines of Bolivia or whatever, right? And so now you'll probably see billions of dollars going chasing that tech, right? Because in theory, then there's trillions of dollars of lithium available. You know, we all need that for batteries, right? And so the question then is like, how do you? Could this be a marketing issue? In that, like, if we were to say there's $1 trillion worth of carbon credits in the Sargassum in the Gulf of Mexico, right? It's just indirect, like it's you know, but it's there if you were to like frame it from that market perspective, you know. And obviously, I'm exaggerating on that number, but could that be how you drive the soulless capitalists into this? You know?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because I mean, one thing that a lot of people know about me is I'm very picky about, you know, what investors that potentially have the opportunity to invest in us, because it is very much to me about impact, but that's because social impact is also a major portion of what we're doing. But I do think that mainstream money, again, ESG is kind of right now I would say number one way that we're seeing mainstream money become accessible to our space. But at the same time, you know, I think it's a balance of saying, yes, it's a major opportunity. And the biggest, another paradigm shift is just the fact that we're not focused on eco guilt, which is basically just saying, look how bad it is. You know, I mentioned the 90% of fish are, you know, exploited, overexploited, or depleted, but I don't focus on that. I focus on well, there's 10%. And obviously, if we're going to save that 10%, aquaculture needs to be a real industry, right? So, you know, I think it's just making people stop having the ocean as an out of sight, out of mind, and also changing the paradigm on the ocean as a charity case only, and actually seeing it as, to your point, an economic opportunity.
The ocean needs the same marketer as space has right now, because the amount of money, I mean, like, you know, we going to space companies is wild. We need you know, reach out to Delian and ask him, you know, how to raise $100 million for, you know, like underwater space factory or factories or something like that. I don't know.
Well, what's funny is actually, so my inspiration for getting into ocean technology was actually James Cameron. Back in 2012, you may remember he dove to the Marianas Trench, which at that point, more people had been to the moon than to the deepest part of our ocean.
Right.
So yeah, so that was literally my, you know, my moment on that, which, you know, one billionaire, yeah, whatever. Go ahead, Brian.
You two are probably both too young for this, but do you guys remember there was a show called Seaquest? If you haven't, so you guys have to watch this then. It's on like, I don't know, Hulu or Netflix or something. It's super cheesy, but it was basically like some producer somewhere was like, Star Trek is super popular. Let's make the sea version of Star Trek.
It's amazing.
And it's super cheesy. It's like military creates this whole underwater army like network, you know, because there's all these terrorists and invaders, and they have trained dolphins and stuff like that, you know. So definitely look it up. Seaquest, I think, had like 5 seasons, and it's so cheesy that it's amazing.
I will. It definitely sounds familiar. You know, I try to turn off the ocean brain every now and then, but no, I actually, there was it Our Blue Planet, right? Or Blue Planet with David Attenborough. That was incredible as well. But I'm, you know, I think one of the key things is like actually Seaspiracy. I feel like this has to come up if we're having the ocean media conversation. First off, I'll just say straight up, they do a great job highlighting the problem, terrible job highlighting the solutions. It actually undermines some of the solutions. But that has been actually a call to action for a lot of people. And so I think it's really interesting that, you know, first off, the science community, you know, basically when the key things that they did that aggravated the science community was, number one, you know, they kind of pick and chose their facts a little bit. And especially to me, the things that stuck out to me, if you remember, they did aquaculture, they shot on aquaculture for shitting a lot in the water, but getting back to our systems focus, right? fish aren't meant to just poop and not have anything to help suck it up. It's supposed to have a reef and and things and plants that actually suck out those nutrients and build a system. And so if you build it right, it's not a problem. And so that, they totally disparaged. And then beyond that, really, they like very, very briefly touched on CBR for like 2 seconds, but like did not do it justice whatsoever. And it was like, you've got people on this problem, and then they just went the moral ethical route, and then just like, anyway. So this is part of the fun of ocean media.
I mean, do you think, and this is probably a stupid suggestion, but do you think we need to enlist Jason Momoa, Aquaman, to be the public spokesperson? Because people, like the average American or average human on this planet, will probably assume that Atlantis is a real thing, and like, have a hard time distinguishing between comic books and movies and reality. So maybe we need to enlist him to like be the champion of the seas.
I think we need to make ocean tech sexy for sure. I mean, that's the bottom line. Whatever it takes.
I'm pretty sure he could make almost anything sexy at this point. Like,
yeah, we just
what Daniel's getting at is that ocean tech needs Beyonce.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really. I'm trying to come up with a pun so bad, but it's been a really long week. But it'll hit me later, I'm sure, at least convenient time. But yeah, it is this true, something has to magnetize people to this. And I will say one of the interesting pieces of what I've been able to see is that, this time of the pandemic has made people much more aware of the value of their time and actually doing something they're passionate about. And that, just creating the opportunity for people to do something about that has been really powerful.
But that's interesting. Like there's always like a galvanizing moment that happens in society, right? That like triggers a movement of people. Whether it's a society, like a social issue, or like I think with the seas, you had that video that went viral of the turtle with the straw stuck in its nose, right? And then all of a sudden, plastic straws were banned across America, which is so incrementally small of an impact on the actual planet, and it's such a big inconvenience for anyone who likes to drink soda, but
it's probably net negative because it politicized the issue, right? Like to a point where it became like a referendum on like ideology, if you like support plastic straws and all that. And it's like, well, hold on, like this is part of a larger conversation, which is like,
but it was a starting point, right? Because all of a sudden all these people who honestly could give a crap before about whatever were like, oh, but the poor turtles, right? And like, because they saw one video, right? And so
sorry, go ahead.
What's I guess what would be the trigger thing that actually creates a much more impactful like people caring about this? Because like people in Florida didn't seem to care when the fish were dying and floating up on the red tides and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting so this is actually getting kind of back to some of our thesis here. Like so I've mentioned, the blue economy, the ocean economy is really primarily made up of defense and fossil fuel companies. If anyone wants to do some homework, there's a report that came out at the beginning of the year called the Ocean 100 that characterized the top 100 corporations making up over 60% of the blue economy. And no surprise that more than half of them were defense and fossil fuels. But, when we look at South Florida, the unique opportunity that I saw, and part of why I came back, other than getting my master's, is the fact that, we're the one corner of the country where these entrenched interests in defense and fossil fuels don't have a footing. And so as a result of that, our ocean economy is 2/3 made up of ecotourism. And so we have it's a $24.6 billion blue economy. And so we have significant amount of money to lose if our environment dies. And we've already lost, I think it's 95% plus of our coral reefs, right? And I think it's, again, like connecting the dots of economic impact and environmental impact are very linked. And it isn't, again, just this charity case of a feel-good thing that, oh, look, there's fish, right? And, climate change and increasing floods and hurricanes obviously are going to show much more massive amounts of impact on that. But, to get the everyday person to care and to make it something that is not only approachable, but something that they truly have as part of their value system. You know, I have a whole spiel where I ruin fish for people. I won't do that for you guys on this podcast. But what I will say is, if you care about sustainability, do your homework. Bottom line, you know, really, it's just this. I think it's a cultural shift, and I think we're seeing it. I think the pandemic has at least started to make people question why we value certain things or why we do things, and so, you know, just to at least lean in a little more on some of that.
Daniel, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining the pod. Anything you want to plug before we wrap here?
Absolutely. Well, next week we have our end of cohort startup showcase. It's this is our inaugural cohort, first cohort we launched. We built the plane while it flew, and it's coming in for a landing, if you will.
And you should say this week, because we're recording on a Friday. This airs on Monday. So
got it.
Just
okay.
to make sure people are not confused.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So this week we are having on Wednesday the 27th at 7 p.m. our startup showcase at Frost Science Museum. If you go to seaworthycollective.com/events, you can register. It's free. Also, if you'd like to buy merch, we have some pretty sick merch, if I do say so myself.
Awesome.
But all that being said, we've already had over 200 people RSVP. You know, we're going to have our startups pitching for everybody. Start with like a nice hour of networking. But really, actually, what I love about Frost, and Brian, I was at the refresh event at Frost a couple weeks ago. I know I got to see you there. You know, they're really, I think, starting to try to help connect with the Miami tech ecosystem. And so to be able to hit the nail on the head of the cross section of the tech ecosystem in Frost, we're really excited to represent that. And it's going to be a production for sure.
Awesome, man. And by the way, you join a really solid list of guests of the Miami Tech Pod who are fellow Gators, like myself. So you have Adam Garfield, Melissa Medina, Siraj. Like there's a nice little crew of us here. So go Gators.
Well, go Gators. I will say I grew up a Canes fan, and then I said I corrected that mistake going to UF, and then I ended up back at UM for my master's. So I'm just confused, but still a Gator through and through.
Awesome, man. All right. We'll check in with you in the future on some of the developments of Seaworthy. Really, really awesome episode. And thanks for coming and sharing the progress you've made, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Really, really great to be here, and really appreciate the work you guys are doing here.
Awesome. All right. This was episode 41 of the Miami Tech Pod. We will be with you next week with a really exciting episode. Make sure to, do the usual, like, subscribe, give us some love on Twitter, and we'll have we'll be there. And that's it. That's it. I have nothing else to say. Mic drop. Later.